Hey there, my name is Trail. Today I'm going to show you how I made this foam Batman cowl.
For this cowl, I used a Pepakura file as the template. I'll include a link to it in the description. Make sure to turn off the texture in this drop-down menu so you can clearly see the correct outline. All of these pieces are very precise. Print out the pieces and make a paper mock-up. If you need to adjust the size, play around with the percentage to get the measurements where you need them. My head is 24 inches around and I didn't have to make any adjustments. Some of these pieces can be easily cut out with scissors, but I prefer to use an X-Acto knife for the more precise pieces. Use a ruler to cut the margins of the pages and tape them together for the larger pieces that can't fit on a single page. I split the face pattern down the nose for easier printing, but I taped it back together to avoid a seam on the actual cowl. Trace the pattern onto the foam and cut it out with a razor knife. I'm using 5mm EVA foam for this project. I used a lot of angle cuts on this project. An outward angle at the top of the eyebrow piece, and 2 inward cuts right above the eye. An inward cut on both edges of both ear pieces, and a much thinner angle for the front and back edges, keeping the tip as narrow as possible. There's an outward angle cut on the bridge of the nose and 2 outward angles for this piece at the top of the head, where it connects to the ears. There are a couple of inward cuts on this huge back piece, one along the back edge of the ears and one on the end of this little piece here. On the temple piece, there's an inward angle cut that goes all the way up from the front, but switches halfway from about 45 degrees to a much more aggressive angle for the ear itself. There's also an outward angle cut on this one spot on the forehead piece. These angle cuts are not specified in the template, and you can change up which ones you want to use, or even add more depending on how rounded or angular you want your cowl to be. I also cut the 2 jaw pieces in the template out as a solid piece so that I had a solid chin strap, but you could easily use Velcro for a split in the middle or swap the strap entirely for elastic. There are some spots where I'm folding the template over to trace a line on the back side of the foam that will become a fold. There's one on the eyebrow, the cheek, and the middle of the nose. I went over these lines with the wedge attachment on my wood burner using a metal ruler to keep my lines straight. You can also use a razor knife to cut a groove out of the foam. Just make sure not to go all the way through. These folds will help accentuate that angled look on the cowl without creating extra seam lines. Use a heat gun to simultaneously seal the surface of the foam and soften it so that you can round out the necessary areas. If you don't have a ball to stretch the foam over, knees and elbows work just fine. Then, use contact cement to glue your edges together. I prefer to use barge cement, but weldwood works too. I like to start at the center of my piece and work out. I started at the center seam of the forehead, then added the eyebrows. Next, I connected the face to the jaw. I used the sanding drum on my rotary tool to round off the jawline edge because I'm going to glue it on as a layer rather than edge to edge. Then I glued the eyes to the nose, added the piece for the top of the head, and connected the temples, which have the front half of the ear. I'm folding the template here to trace a line on the front face of the biggest piece. I added about 1/2 inch of extra material to the template so that I can glue the jaw on top of the back piece to give it some extra definition. Once I had my lines, I glued the whole back piece together. Then I connected it to the front half, starting at the jaw and moving up towards the ears. Then, after both sides were glued, I connected the center at the top. The last pieces to get glued on were the ears. I started with the front piece to make sure the seams looked good. Then I moved from the bottom up. Then I added the back earpiece in the same way, starting with the outside edge, then joining both earpieces down the middle. Once the whole cowl is assembled, give it one more pass with the heat gun to even out the shape and adjust any spots that need additional shaping. Here is what the fully constructed cowl looks like so far. At this point, I sanded down the edges of the ears with my rotary tool because they were just a bit too rough and sharp. After that, it's time to fill the seams. Quick Seal is a common option, but I've recently been using this light modeling paste from Liquitex. Go over all of the seams in thin coats, and expect to make multiple layers, allowing it to dry in between each time. This is more or less how the seams should look. Then, using a high grit sandpaper, I used 220, sand down the filler to smooth everything out. I started with a sanding stick that I made by gluing the sandpaper to a large popsicle stick, which works really well for the flat and rounded areas, but I had to go in by hand for areas like the eyebrows. Give the whole thing one more pass with the heat gun to seal any sanded foam, and now we're on to painting. I used Plastidip, which is how I seal all of my foam projects. However, since I wanted that leathery bat cowl texture, I didn't use any other paints and just made sure to get several even coats with the Plastidip. You can also see here that I need a better painting setup. And finally, to make sure the cowl fits properly, cut some small squares of 1-inch cushion foam. You can just glue these in with regular old hot glue. I placed mine towards the back and top of the cowl in order to press my face into the front and fill the spaces. After that, the cowl is ready.
There you go. That is the foam Batman cowl. Now, the template that I got for this, the Pepakura file, as I said, will be down in the description below. But that one is based off of the Arkham Origins Batman cowl. So if you don't quite like this style, you might be able to apply this tutorial to another Pepakura file that you might be able to find. If you want to be able to use that Pepakura file and you don't already have the right software, there's the free version Pepakura Viewer, and there's the one-time paid version Pepakura Designer. I recommend either version of that software, whichever one you want to get. It's a very useful cosplay tool. And that's all you need to be able to access that file. Depending on whether or not you do want to just take some creative liberties with this same template, there are a number of different things you can do with this pattern. The only real necessary angle cuts are for the ears up here, maybe down here on the eyebrows, but everything else is a matter of how you want the cowl to be shaped. I'm even considering redoing this cowl and making it a little rounder, making this just a regular edge to edge here on the temple, making the eyebrows a little less aggressive. I also kind of want to bring this eye down a little bit at the top so that there's not quite as much space going up to my eyebrow. I think these could be a little bit smaller. You could also go the exact opposite direction and you could put even more angle cuts onto this and make it look almost more like an Injustice kind of cowl, even with the same template. So as I said, that's going to be down in the description. I don't have a template for the neck seal that you've seen me wearing in some of those cosplay pictures, and that's because that's an old piece that I just kind of threw together ages ago for a different version of this costume, and it happened to work really well with this cowl, and I wanted that two-piece freedom of motion without the armor around my neck. So if you need a quick neck seal template in a pinch, you can search them up on Etsy. There are plenty of makers that make foam neck seal templates, but if you're interested in mine in particular, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. I might be able to throw together a follow-up tutorial and recreate that pattern so that I can make that available to you as well. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for following along and watching this far. Like and subscribe if you would like to. It would be very helpful. I haven't been at this in a while, but I've got some other content coming up. Hopefully I'm ready to move on to new projects. So if you're interested in those, feel free to stick around, and I'll see you next time.